Good morning everybody and welcome back to the channel. This is Travis P11 and today we're going to show you how to do a disassembly and cleaning of the Rossi RS22 semi-automatic 22LR rifle, also known as the Mossberg 702 Plinkster. Now, other than the stock design, there really is not much of a difference between the Mossberg 702 and the Rossi RS22. Let's go and talk about what we're going to use for this cleaning this morning and what's going to be necessary to get the gun taken care of. First things first, you're going to need to get yourself some sort of a solvent cleaner lubricant. I like to use Cleanse Oil. I've been using it on quite a few different cleaning jobs on the channel and it does work really well. You can order it online, I believe, over at cleanseoil.com. I'm not sponsored by Cleanse Oil, but the stuff does work really good. You know, you can also use Safari Land Break Free CLP, or you can use Remington Rem Oil, whatever works best for you, but just make sure it's got some sort of a CLP, a clean lube and protecting rating on it when you buy it. You're also going to need to get yourself a set of punches and some sort of a blunt instrument to tap the punches with, maybe a hammer. I'll just be using the rubber side of my screwdriver here. We've got a couple pins that we're going to have to remove in order to separate the bolt from the lower receiver. I also recommend some sort of a cleaning brush or a toothbrush. This is just an Allen cleaning brush I bought at the store. You can get these in the cleaning section of most of your sporting goods stores in the gun area, your mom and pop gun stores, and so on. Bore light's kind of handy, so you can check the bore, make sure it's nice and shiny and clean when we get done. For the actual cleaning itself, you might want to use some cotton cleaning patches. These are Allen brand cotton cleaning patches. You can also cut up an old cotton t-shirt if you have one. That's the economical way to do it, and that'll work just fine too. Q-tips. Always nice to have some Q-tips for some of that fine detail work. Now, to actually clean the barrel itself, you got a couple different options here. I prefer, with this type of a curve on the back of the barrel, I think it's best to use a bore snake. This is a 22LR, 22 long rifle bore snake. What it is it's a cable that's got some bristles on it. We'll drop it from the rear of the barrel, pull it through the front a couple times. It'll get the bore nice and shiny and clean, and it'll make it look nice. Now, one other thing about this, because we do have to hammer some pins out, and that part can be just a little bit tricky, you're going to need to set the receiver on something to tap the pins out. A buddy of mine recommended to use a roll of masking tape. You'll set the receiver on the side and tap out the pins. If you have a wooden block, that should work well for you. You'll need to find something that's going to work best for you. I've got all kinds of stuff sitting around the house. We might experiment a little bit and find out what works best. Now, just a little warning, the disassembly and cleaning of the RS22, it's not impossible. It can be a little bit frustrating. You got to be careful because there's a recoil spring in here that you don't want to bend while you're removing it. So you got to be very careful how you do that. And I'll give you some tips on how to do that also. And then the reassembly can be very tricky because we basically have to reassemble it upside down. You got to get the bolt to fit into the trigger group, the receiver when you reassemble it. And we're going to try a few different things to see what we can do to get it work. I've only taken this apart and cleaned it one time, and I've watched several other YouTube videos on how to do this. And I think I got some real good ideas, so we'll go ahead and do that. So yes, and before I forget, the screwdriver, you're going to need to get yourself a Phillips head screwdriver, and you want to make sure that it's going to fit in the screws in the bottom of the stock. Make sure there's as little play as possible when you put the screw head in there. Because they use traditional Phillips head screws, these are going to wear out over time. And if you're using a screwdriver that's too small, you're going to be constantly grinding away at the inside of the spaces for the Phillips head itself. And eventually the screw is going to be rendered useless and you're going to have a stripped out screw and you're not going to be able to do anything about it except basically drill it out. So why they didn't use a traditional Allen screw or bolt or hex head screw, I have no idea, but you want to make sure you've got a nice tight Phillips head that's going to fit in those spaces as we take out the screws to disassemble the receiver from the stock. All right, first things first, let's go ahead and ensure that the firearm is in fact unloaded. So squeeze the rear of the magazine release and pull your magazine down. We'll clean off the magazine here in just a little bit. Now I've got a chamber flag here in the receiver, so we're gonna go ahead and pull that back, remove the chamber flag. We're just gonna confirm that the firearm is in fact unloaded. It is. You can leave it cocked, it's not gonna hurt anything. In fact, the trigger pack from this kind of looks like an AR-15. It's got a traditional hammer with trigger springs, and you might be surprised how similar that lower receiver is gonna look to an AR-15. But anyway, without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so I put just a drop of Cleanse Oil on my cleaning patch. We're gonna go ahead and wipe off the magazine. Obviously, you wanna keep any kind of oil off the ammunition, if at all possible, so it doesn't ruin your primers and so on. Now, granted, you've got 22 long rifle ammunition, which is sealed. It shouldn't be much of an issue, but you want to keep the gun oil away from the ammunition as much as possible, okay? We put 100 rounds of ammunition through this RS22. I shot some CCI mini mags. So we're gonna see just how dirty it is inside once we take it apart. Okay, magazine is nice and clean. We'll go ahead and set that off to the side. And let's move on to separating the stock from the receiver. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and remove that front screw. So go ahead and take your screwdriver, just put it in that hole and go ahead and take the screw out. And now we'll go ahead and move to the rear screw back here. I have a real thin barrel on the screwdriver, and if you have something that's too thick, there's a possibility that you'll hit the inside of the stock itself, but I think we're going to be okay here. All right, we'll go ahead and remove those screws. They are interchangeable, so don't worry about that. Okay, just to prevent any kind of rust or anything, we're just going to use the same cloth that we used with the magazine. Just go ahead and wipe off the screws. You can have a little oil on there. It's going to be okay. You don't need to use any kind of thread locking compound or anything like that when you reassemble the stock and the receiver. It's really not a big deal. Okay, go ahead and inspect the inside of the stock. Make sure there's nothing broke, nothing cracked. You may need to do a little bit of sanding at this point. If you have any kind of barrel to stock contact and you want to make sure that the rifle is truly free floated, you can sand this out a little bit if you want to. I'm not going to mess around with it. We don't have to do any further cleaning on the stock, so we will just set that off to the side. Okay, so you've got a pin in the rear and the front of the receiver, and to remove it, you're going to need to use a pin punch. You're going to just simply tap on it, and the pin's going to come out on the back side. Now, some videos I've watched, they leave the pin in place. There's a little bit of a rough texture on the pin. You can tap the pin out completely if you want to. I'd recommend doing that. The problem I ran into was my front one was so tight that I could not get it pushed far enough out that I could actually separate the receiver, the upper and lower receiver. So I'm just going to go ahead and tap them out completely, and I'll show you how I did that. And a little shout out to my buddy Defense Dad. Make sure you guys check out his channel over on YouTube. He's the one that gave me the suggestion of setting this on the masking tape. It's an easy way to push the pin out and not have to worry about having the gun sitting at an angle. I've got the front of the barrel just resting on the bottle of cleanse oil, which is on its side. So let's go ahead and tap out the pin. Now, since I've already done this one time, this pin came right out. I mean, it's still tight, it's gonna stay in, and obviously the stock is keeping it in place when you have the stock on it, so it's not gonna ride itself out. But we did have a little trouble getting the pins to move the first time that we did this. Now, I've also got the front receiver pin, and we're not gonna use a lot of pressure to do this since it is just gonna tap right out, but we will go ahead and do so. The front one is the one that's a little more tricky. So at this point, if you take a look, you can see how the pins are just sticking out. You can remove them if you want to. If you're pulling on and you can't get the lower trigger group to come apart from the bolt itself, then you may need to pull the pins out, okay? But you want to be very careful before you do the next step. I'm going to give you some ideas on how to do this. And if you did remove the pins, go ahead and just give those a little wipe off. Basically, your bolt is locked into the lower trigger group with a bit of a rail that keeps it in place. So here's what you want to do. Okay, so the easiest way that I've learned to remove the bolt from the trigger pack, and this, you have to have big hands to do this, you might have to have some help if you've got smaller hands. We're going to pull back on the charging handle all the way to the rear so that the bolt is seated all the way to the rear, and then we're simply going to lift the trigger pack out. It will come apart if there's a lot of force and you have to tug at it, let the bolt go, push everything back together, pull back and try it again. The thing is, we do not want that recoil spring that's seated down here in the bolt to bend as we're pulling up on the trigger group. We want this to come out in two pieces, okay? So go ahead and pull back on the receiver like you see I did here, all the way. Okay, and then simply lift the trigger pack out, your trigger group out, and we will go ahead and clean this portion right now. So at this point, if you haven't done so, you may want to go ahead and put the safety on. I probably should have told you that at the beginning. I'll put that in the video so that you guys do so. That way you don't accidentally release the hammer and it slams into the back of the central part of the receiver here. So let's go ahead and just wipe it off with a clean patch with some oil on it and get all the dirt off of it. And we'll see how dirty this thing really is. Now, the amount of scrubbing that you're going to have to do, the amount of work this is going to take, it's really going to depend on how many rounds you put down the pipe on this thing. The majority of your fouling is going to happen up here towards the front where you've got your feed ramp where the bullets feed and all the shooting takes place. Okay, let's go ahead and wipe everything off with a patch with some oil on it. Get that patch down in there, scrub out those springs a little bit. Again, you can use a brush if you've got a lot of buildup going on here. Let's get another patch. Also get your Q-tips handy. We'll use those for some of the fine detail work here in just a moment. So now as I wipe off the feeding ramp up here, it's slowly starting to get some of its matte luster back to it. I notice it's got some pretty well caked on powder burns up here in the front. Again, you may need to scrub that a little bit with a brush, but it should look basically flat gray when it comes completely clean, okay? Go ahead and just take your pinky and just push your cleaning patch down the magazine well and wipe that out in case there's any debris down there. I tend to shoot in an area that's a bit dusty, sometimes dirty and windy, so I do get a lot of crud inside my firearms. There we go. Okay, wipe out underneath the extractor right here. Now, what I want you to do is to take the firearm off safe, put your finger on the front of the hammer and pull the trigger, and then just release the hammer, okay? Now this is going to allow us to get back down inside here. Put a single drop of oil on a Q-tip, and just go ahead and wipe out the inside. Okay, it's going to add a little bit of lubricant, a little bit of cleaning, a little bit of protection so stuff doesn't rust out. You can also get underneath that hammer. There we go. Okay, now go ahead and push the hammer back down. Go ahead and put the lower trigger group back on safe and just go ahead and wipe it out. There we go. Okay, go ahead and set that off to the side. Okay, so now this next step is going to be a bit of a two-step process. We've got the bolt down in here. There's a recoil spring towards the rear. There's a little plastic buffer right here, okay? When you put the buffer back in, you're basically going to put it back in just like this. It's going to sit in the space back here in the rear. Okay, see how that looks? So everything will go back together. I know sometimes it's easy to flip the buffer and put it in this way. Make sure that the buffer just goes right back in, straight down just like this, okay? All right, now what we need to do is we need to take off the charging handle and the bolt, so it's pretty easy to do. Okay, now to remove the charging handle from the bolt, it's pretty simple. Just go ahead and grab a flat screwdriver. I know I should have told you about this sooner. And just go ahead and wedge it between the top of the receiver and the bolt, just gently, gently. We're not gonna scratch anything up, so don't worry about it, okay? And push up just a little bit, kind of wedge it up like that. So we got a little bit of a space right there. And then you can go ahead and pull that charging handle out and push the bolt back in. Okay, now we'll go ahead and wipe off the charging handle with a cloth with some oil on it. It might get a little bit dirty, it's a possibility. Okay, now taking out the bolt can be just a little bit tricky because there's a lot of spring tension here. What we don't want to do is we don't want to bend this recoil spring, okay? So what I do is just push back on the bolt a little bit and pull up, push back as far as you can, as hard as you can. So I've got it compressed, and then slowly start to lift it out of the receiver, okay? So push back and pull up, go. And it's going to come right out. Here we go. And we did preserve the spring. So if your spring's got like a 45-degree kink in it, you might want to order a new one. And we'll move on to the next step. Okay, so this is pretty much going to be the dirtiest part of the cleaning. We're going to go ahead and wipe off the cleaning rod. You've got all that fouling that's going to happen around the area of the bolt. Go ahead and wipe that off with a drop of oil. Set it off to the side. Go ahead and wipe off your recoil spring. Might be a little bit of powder on there too. Okay, doesn't matter which way you have it when you reassemble it, just as long as it goes back on the cleaning rod, and we'll show you how to do that process. Okay, now the bolt itself, what we're going to do is we're going to take the Q-tip with a little bit of oil on it. Just go ahead and wipe out these channels. Let's get this part taken care of first. There we go. Get in there a little bit. You can hit it with the dry side if you want to and go over this a couple times until it starts to come clean. Also, the rear of the bolt's got some little divots in it. You want to get those wiped out too. And if you're cleaning this in real time, you're seeing exactly what I'm seeing at the same time, okay? Go and wipe out the rear of the bolt. Okay, just go ahead and give everything a general wipe off with your cleaning cloth. So it's only one side of this that's actually polished silver. The other side is kind of a flat black color. And you will start to notice the wear points, and that's where you're going to make sure that you have your lubrication. Any place that you start to see the finish wearing off, that's going to be like a metal on metal contact or a metal on plastic contact point. Definitely want to make sure that we have oil and lubrication in those points. Okay, so we're going to scrub this for a little while until these patches come clean. Do make sure that you get the bolt face right here. Just make sure you wipe that off in general. There's going to be a lot of buildup there too. This is going to take a few patches, so you keep doing the same. We'll come back here in a few minutes, and we'll go from there. Okay, now that we have the bolt nice and clean, we're just going to go ahead and run a little channel of lubricant down the middle here, all the way around. Just make sure the whole thing has a little bit of oil on it all the way around. Obviously, you don't need it dripping wet, but you do want to make sure you've got some general lubricant on it. So take a Q-tip where this hole is, where the guide rod and recoil spring are going to go. Just go ahead and wedge a Q-tip in there and go ahead and scrub that out. Okay, now go ahead and see how much crud comes off of that. Now go ahead and take the dry end of the Q-tip. We want to leave this channel completely dry, okay, because you don't want any kind of fouling to build up in here, any dirt or dust. And if it's a wet channel, it's going to gather up muck and crud. So you can see how we've got some of that original factory assembly grease in there, which is crazy because I did this the first time I cleaned the gun when I first bought it. Okay, the bolt's got a nice little general coat of lubricant on it. Let's go ahead and set that off to the side. And we will move over to the upper receiver, I guess you could say, the interior housing. Okay, there's a lot of powder buildup in here, so what we want to do is put a few drops of oil on a cotton patch and just scrub out the inside, and then we'll move on to the barrel. Okay, so just keep scrubbing that out until it comes clean. It's okay to leave a small coat of oil inside this receiver, just a real thin coat, and the reason why is because this is basically untreated, unfinished inside, so this could rust out potentially. And if you have some lubricant in there, that's going to be an easy way to protect the inside of it from future corrosion. Okay, so give it a nice good scrub. When your patches finally come clean, consider this part clean also, okay? All right, now let's go ahead and move on to clean the barrel. Okay, so take your bore snake, just put a little drop of oil in front and in back of the cleaning bristles. Basically, we're gonna run this through probably 2 or 3 times, and you're going to take the weighted end and push that from the rear, okay, into the barrel. Go. So just go ahead and hold on to the barrel and pull the bore snake through. There we go. Okay, we're gonna do that one more time, and then we'll check the barrel, make sure it's nice and clean. So what's cool about the Real Avid bore snake, their bore cleaner that they sell, this one's called the Bore Boss, by the way. You just simply take the back of your cable, you're gonna hook it in the handle, and this puck is gonna act as your pull handle while you're pulling the bore snake through, so it makes it really easy to get the tension that you need to pull through. So I've never had any of these fail before. I've got about 3 or 4 of them. I'm not endorsed by these guys. These cost about 10 bucks. Most of your bore snakes, bore bosses run about $9 or $10. Okay, let's go ahead and begin the process of reassembly. Okay, so this next part can be a little bit tricky, so just bear with me, okay? So to reassemble the bolt, we've got the upper part of the receiver sitting flat down on the ground. It's on a nice soft area. Okay, we've got the bolt. What you want to do is go ahead and take your guide rod and your recoil spring, okay? Push in the guide rod into the recoil spring, and then you want to push the recoil spring back into this little hole right here, which we cleaned out earlier. Now, this part's going to be a little bit tricky. What you're going to need to do is you're going to need to compress these two together as good as you can, all right? You're going to want to push these two together when you put them back into the receiver. Now, there is a hole back here at the rear of the receiver that you're going to notice. This little plug from the guide rod spring is going to have to go into this hole down here, and it's going to have to lock into place. So what I'm basically going to do is I'm going to compress everything together. I'm going to drop it in the receiver, just let go, and then I'll be able to just manipulate and move this little guide rod over into the hole, okay? So, there we go. So at this point, you can see I've got the recoil spring, the guide rod. It's off center just a little tiny bit. What you can do is you can take your screwdriver and just pop that up into place, and it'll lock into place, okay? I got mine to pop into place. We're good to go, so that's what it should look like. Okay, now, at this point, you got to get that charging handle back into place, so you want to take your flathead screwdriver. This is kind of like what we did when we removed it. Okay, again, just go ahead and put it in the top of the receiver between the bolt and the receiver, and just pry it up just a little tiny bit. There you go, maybe about a ½ inch or so, maybe 1/4 inch. Go ahead and take your charging handle. Okay, it's only going to fit one way. Push that back in. So it's going to look something like this, okay? And then just go ahead and push it back down, and it'll snap into place. Now it's got a lot of play in it, so don't be surprised about that, okay? All right, now let's go ahead and put the trigger pack back into place, and I'll show you how to do this. So what's going to happen here is this bar is going to need to go into the right side of the bolt, and there's a channel that's cut in there. So when you pull back on the bolt, push this down and let go, it's going to allow that bolt to fly back into place, lock into place, and mate up with that bar right there, okay? So this is exactly how we took it apart before. Okay, so we'll go ahead and pull back on that bolt. Okay, make sure it stays back all the way. Go ahead and take your little trigger pack here. Now, there is some pressure from the hammer, so that's going to be causing this whole receiver pack to be pushing up. So you're going to want to push down on it when you let go, and that bolt's going to just lock right into place. Okay, if you don't push down on it, that bolt's going to constantly get caught up. So it is actually in there right now. If you can look through and you can see the pins, you can see the pinholes all the way through nice and flush, then you know that you've got the bolt remated to the trigger pack properly. Okay, now this is going to take you a couple times to get it right, but the more you practice it, the easier it's going to get. So just follow the steps that I gave you. If you got to do it over and over a couple times, you're fine. The key here is to make sure that the bolt stays flat into the receiver, and you push some backwards and downwards tension on the bolt as you're pushing the trigger pack back into place, and then you let go of the bolt, and the bolt itself and the trigger pack will go together as one. Okay, so we'll go ahead and take the serrated end. We're going to make sure that the smooth end goes in first and that the serrated end is pointing up. Make sure you have that on the ejection side. So go ahead and take your pin and just squeeze the receiver upper and lower portions together. There you go. Just press down with your hands. If you need to, if it's necessary, you can take your punch and you can punch them back into place. So we've just about got the first one seated. Now let's go ahead and work on the front. Again, smooth side in first. Okay, go ahead and push that down into the hole. Okay, that was a little bit tighter. And we're just going to finish it off with our punch, okay? And just go ahead and tap it into place. Now, once the pins are in, you can check the action and make sure that there's no binding, make sure that everything is lined up properly. You should be able to just simply pull back on the charging handle all the way, You should have a nice full opening. The charging handle should go all the way to the rear, like you see right here. If it only goes about halfway, there's a possibility that your buffer has flipped when you're reassembling the upper and the lower. So you're gonna wanna take the trigger pack back out, reposition the buffer again, put everything back together, and again, you should have a nice, relatively smooth action. Like I said, it's not the smoothest thing in the world, but as long as it's not binding and catching, you're in good shape. All right, so go ahead and put the receiver back into the stock, put it back together, just simply squeeze it, push it back into place. Yeah, just the second time cleaning it and taking it apart now, much easier to go back in than it was the first time. And you can put your screws back into place. Okay, you've got the front screw and the rear screw. I do like to kind of squeeze on the receiver a little bit to make sure it doesn't pop out of the stock. And I don't totally torque down the front screw. I just do a little bit tightening on the front. Okay, till I start to feel some tension. Squeeze on the back. I don't know if there's any particular pound weight. You don't need to over torque these things when they're snug and they just simply won't move. You know, you can stop there. It's okay. You don't have to over tighten them. You don't want to. The last thing we do is strip these things out. Okay, that's good enough. All right, so guys, that is basically the disassembly and cleaning of the Rossi RS22. Once you get past the procedure for disassembling and reassembling the bolt, it really is not that hard of a 22 rifle to disassemble and clean, but it can be a little bit tricky at times. So in the meantime, if you like what you see, please make sure you guys mash that bell, like and subscribe. I got a ton of videos on my channel. We've also got a little podcast that we do called Caliber Corner, which is Saturday mornings at 8 a.m. Central Time. Make sure you do check it out, like and subscribe. You guys can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Gunstreamer, guntube.org, and we're all over the place. So in the meantime, I want you guys to have fun, be safe, get out and do some shooting, and as you know, we will talk to you soon. All right, take care, everybody. Bye-bye.